Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to our West Coast friends. Welcome to the Tribal Law and Policy Institute webinar presentation of Current Funding Opportunities for Tribal Healing to Wellness Course, Fiscal Year 2014 CTAS. The attendee lines will be muted during the presentation, but please feel free to type in any questions in the questions pane on your webinar panel to the right of your screen. We'll be able to address your questions as they're relevant during the presentation or at the end during our question and answer session. Now that it's 11 a.m. on the Pacific Coast, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today our presenters are going to be Jerry Gardner, Executive Director of the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, Lauren Van Schilfgaard, Tribal Law Specialist at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and Trish Saxon, who's a Policy Advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance at the Office of Justice Programs. She'll be joining us at the end of this presentation to address any questions that you might have. Just a brief outline of today's presentation. We're going to provide a brief overview of two drug court-specific requests for proposals, or RFPs. However, we'll be addressing those in more detail in tomorrow's webinar. We'll then be going over in detail the CTAS 2014 RFP and specifically Purpose Area 3. We'll then detail the Tribal 10 key components as base elements for a Tribal Healing to Wellness Court, some general grant writing tips, and then our question and answer period. What this webinar will not cover is the full plethora of information and resources that are necessary for a CTAS application. There are many different moving parts to this application, and you can see all the available resources at the Department of Justice's website at justice.gov/tribal/grants. If you go to justice.gov/tribal, you'll see a bar on the left hand of the screen for CTAS, and that includes all of the different links that you'll need for this application. As I mentioned, we will also not be covering in detail the Bureau of Justice Assistance Adult Drug Court RFP. That will be covered in tomorrow's presentation, along with the SAMHSA Treatment Court RFP. We'll also not be covering in detail the two purpose areas that the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP, offer that could potentially also be used for Tribal Healing to Wellness Courts. This is Purpose Area 8 and 9. We'll be bringing those to your attention in further detail, but we won't be covering the application and process in detail like we will be for Purpose Area 3. So to dive right in, the two specific drug court applications that are available, as I mentioned, are the first one, the Bureau of Justice Assistance Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant Program. This is an RFP that is specific to drug courts. However, it's available to both state and Indian tribal governments. So they offer grants just for drug courts. You can find this application at bja.gov. This application is due March 18th, so about a week before the CTAS application is due. So we're definitely in high grant season time. Timothy Jeffries, who's a policy advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, is the main contact for this grant, and here's his information. He will also be on tomorrow's webinar to answer any questions that you might have about this particular grant. This grant offers two different types of grants, one implementation and one enhancement. For either one, there's a maximum for $350,000 for implementation and $200,000 for enhancement. For both, obviously with implementation, it's designed to help governments that might be in the planning process but do not yet have an operational drug court, whereas enhancement is geared specifically towards already operational drug courts. As I mentioned, it's open to both tribes and states. So the pool is much smaller in the sense that it's only for drug courts, but much bigger because you're competing with the entire country, not just tribes. There's no set-aside for tribes, So in theory, no tribe could get the grants, or all tribes could get the grants. It's a competitive pool in which tribes and states are in the same competition. Typically, a handful of tribes have received awards every year, about 5 to 6. In fiscal year 2012, only 1 tribe received an award, but last year, 3 tribes received an award. The other RFP that we'll be discussing tomorrow is a new RFP that the SAMHSA department is offering for treatment drug courts. This is an interesting RFP because it's offered to juvenile drug courts that are provided by either Indian tribes or state governments, as well as specifically adult tribal healing to wellness courts. And so that's available only to tribes. So as I mentioned, we'll be going over that in more detail tomorrow. The due date for that is March 17th, so again, right in the same period as BJA and CTAS. SAMHSA is offering another grant. It's not specific to healing to wellness courts, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because it is specific to tribes. It's designed for, excuse me, the planning and developing infrastructure to improve the mental wellness. This is the Circles of Care 6. They have provided a webinar that is specifically for this grant. If you're interested, we'll be providing the link tomorrow. It's also on wellnesscourts.org if you're interested in that. Just a couple of things to be aware of with SAMHSA. There are only a handful of awards that have been awarded to tribes over the last couple of years. This is the treatment drug course RFP is a new RFP this year, so we don't have any information on it from previous years. But because it's specific to tribes, it might be something to consider. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of why we're here today. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Gardner, who's the Executive Director of the Tribal Law and Policy Institute.
Thank you, Lauren. So now we're ready to shift to CTAS, the primary focus of this webinar. The CTAS, the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation. And this would be, I believe this is the 4th year of CTAS. It was started in fiscal year 2010 in response to concerns about from tribes about how difficult the various different grant processes were through the Justice Department. And so there was this was designed as an effort for tribes to be able to put together one joint application for the range of different tribal specific grant opportunities. Now, I think the distinction to be careful of here is that CTAS is combining together the Department of Justice grant opportunities for grants for which only tribes are eligible. So it isn't limited. You know, tribes can apply for more Justice Department grants than CTAS, but CTAS is one in which only tribes are eligible. So as Lauren was indicating, there are certainly illustrations of drug courts or other kinds of specific kinds of grants that the Justice Department offers, but that where tribes are one of the eligible applicants, but not the only one. So CTAS is an effort to combine together tribal-specific grants for which only tribes are eligible. So this one is due March 24th. If we go to the next slide, and certainly encourage you to make sure the link here provides to the full RFP, which is important to the request for proposals. It's very important to have that and print that out. It's also important, as we'll go through here, to make sure that you have the specific templates as you go through that aren't specifically included in the CTAS RFP, but instead on the website, which we'll go over. So if we go to the next slide, that what's new for this time, which is the 4th time for CTAS. Also, I just would mention, if you want to look back, there is information on the awardees for each of the 3 previous ones. So they're all listed on the website that we'll go through in a minute. What's new here is, again, the solicitation application process is beginning earlier. It was opened in mid-December. I believe this is the 2nd year in which that's happened. And then it's kept open for the maximum period. I believe that these kinds of RFPs can be kept open. So it's open for a full 90-day period in order to allow tribes the maximum period of time in which to be able to pull things together. Then other things is that the question and answer templates have been updated. We'll go through some of those. The strategic planning program has been expanded. That's purpose area 2, with an opportunity to request additional funding in fiscal year 2015 with the submission of approved strategic plan. One of the reductions is that there's funding, and this is BJA funding, under purpose area 4, that the funding for planning a new, it used to be for planning a new construction projects, has been cut back, that it's now for renovation only. So at that point, I think we could go back to there used to, years ago, talk about the Tribal Court Assistance Program, that the closest you could get to construction was construction paper. But here, it appears that you can do renovation with this, but it's really important that this, it's a BJA purpose area 4, has significantly changed. And we're not going to be going over that here today, but that's important to know. And then there has been an update to all the purpose areas to allow for the special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians that was established under VAWA 2013. Then there actually have been 3 tribes so far that have been approved for the initial pilot project, and all tribes would be then eligible to exercise this increased jurisdiction, tribal court jurisdiction, as of, I believe it's March 7th of 2015, which is 2 years from the date that was enacted. But it's important here to know that this has been updated to reflect that increased jurisdiction. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, here, it's really important as a grant writer always to be focused on when things are due. So it's really important that this was opened in December. It closes March 24th. It's very important to also note, because I believe a number of these different grants had been at 12 p.m. Eastern, had been the closing time. And now it's set so it's closed at 7 p.m. Eastern, which is 4 p.m. here on the left coast, and 3 p.m. in Alaska. So it's really important to focus on that. It's best not to wait until that day anyway, and there will be, keep in mind that it's going to be a lot of folks applying and the like, and if you can apply earlier, and even if you're applying that day, earlier in the day, it is important to keep in mind. That then the awards process, the notices will happen sometime in September, certainly by September 30th of 2014. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, we'll get to the next slide in just a minute, but the next slide covers the 9 purpose areas in this particular RFP. So we're having a little technical problems here, I think, but the 9 purpose areas are essentially the same as they were. There's been some modifications, but I believe that 9 purpose areas are the same as they were last fiscal year. So that there are, the first one is COPS, the second one is the Strategic Planning Initiative, the third one is the one that's going to be the primary focus here, which is BJA Purpose Area 3, which combines what had been called before the Tribal Courts Assistance Program, or TCAP, and the Indian Alcohol and Substance Abuse Prevention Program, or ISAP. That's what those 2 had been known as in the past, but it's called Justice Assistance in Alcohol and Substance Abuse. It's the overall Purpose Area 3, and it's the most likely CTAS area in which you would find funding for wellness courts. And so then other areas of Purpose Area 4, which is BJA for correctional, and then again that's one where there were changes, and then there's Purpose Area 5 is OVW, Violence Against Women Tribal Governments Program. 6 and 7 are both from the Office for Victims of Crime. 6 is the Criminal Justice Act Partnership for Tribal Communities, and 7 is the Comprehensive Tribal Victim Assistance Program. 8 and 9 are both OJJDP, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Programs. And we're just going to cover those briefly because both of those are potential funding for wellness courts, for juvenile wellness courts, but there's very limited funding under both of them, and it's important to keep that in mind. So we'll cover those just very briefly, just highlight those. Those are two other areas in which it's possible to fund a wellness court. Next slide, please. Okay. So the next slide, and this is very, very important to keep in mind as you're going through, as you're looking at putting a proposal together, that there are 4 different areas in which you're scored. And it's really important to look at those and to focus on those different areas. So in keeping with that, the tribal community and justice profile, this is the overall profile that a tribe would submit for all programs, including wellness court if you're applying for wellness court, but it's not limited to wellness court. So it's an overall one. It's important to keep in mind here, and that has both an executive summary and a tribal narrative profile. It's important to keep in mind here that this is a change in the scoring. That last year, the tribal profile had been 40% of the score. This year, it's 30% of the score. So that's one change, and it was picked up from the purpose area narrative that had been, which is the primary focus we're going to go here. The purpose area narrative, and in this case we're looking at purpose area 3, is now 50%. So it's half of the score, and in prior years that had been 40% of the score. So one of the changes this year is that there's more of a focus on the purpose area narrative and a little less scoring for the profile. Then the budget detail worksheet and narrative, including the demographic form, is 15%, and the project or program timeline is 5%. Then there are other documents. These are optional documents in some sense. I mean, certainly, well, no, I take it back. The first two are not optional. That the tribal authority to apply documentation is required for all, and it needs to be a current. It actually has to be a current tribal authority. You have to look at the specifics in the RFP. I think it is, in some prior years, they've allowed for signatures later, but this one, it appears that it has to be a current document submitted with the application. And then if the tribe hasn't, or tribal program has an indirect cost rate, then that agreement must be applied, must be submitted. The other attachments, which are mentioned on page 9 of the RFP, and we'll come back to that, those are optional. But I would really recommend that you, though they are optional, they are an opportunity for you to provide more detail. And even though they're listed as optional, my recommendation as a grant writer and grant reviewer is that you provide those as much as you possibly can. And we'll cover those in another slide later, but they include letters of support, resumes of key personnel, job descriptions for unfilled positions, and any memorandums of understanding or agreement. And those, again, though they're optional, I would strongly recommend submitting as much of those as you possibly can because it does add more to your proposal. Next slide. And here's where we're referring to the website, that you really do need to refer to the CTAS website information. And that's crucial here, that there is information there that you will not find in the RFP. The crucial information, including the different templates that we're going to be talking about, are located there. And there's updated information, there's fact sheets, there's teleconference and webinar information, and like this provided there. So it's it's www.justice.gov/tribal, and then when that shows up, then you look for the CTAS specific information, and it'll give you information on the application, the RFP itself, on the different templates, and it also gives you information on the various teleconferences and webinars. So again, as Lauren indicated, we're covering here, we're primarily focused on what you need specifically for wellness course and not on the full range of things you need for CTAS. We certainly encourage you to listen to or even play the tapes later of the different teleconference and webinars that are on CTAS more generally. The next slide, go to the next slide. On the next slide is just a possible approach and process. And this is just something we'd suggest doing. That basically, you need to make sure that when you're going through and you're looking at a specific purpose area for CTAS, that you've got all the information on that particular purpose area that's available both in the CTAS RFP itself and then online. And so I really encourage you, and you know, personally what I would tend to do on these is to actually cut and paste from the RFP and put together all the information you need for the specific purpose area. So you'll find in the RFP that there's 3 different sections that are going to have information, and we've kind of combined them together here as we go through for Purpose Area 3 and also for the 2 OJJDP purpose areas, is that there's specific information, purpose area specific information, and that's very detailed. It's on pages 9 to 31 of the CTAS RFP. Then you need to look at pages 31 to 33 of the CTAS RFP, have the amount and length of awards section of the RFP. This is a very important one to look at. You really want to look at and see how much funding is available, how many awards will be granted for the particular purpose area, and obviously those that have more funding are more likely to be funded. Where some, for instance, the Tribal Youth Program and the other OJJDP programs have been reduced over time in the total amount. So I think TYP now there's only 8 to 10 awards, and that's important to keep in mind. So those are steps, or then, excuse me, step 3 then is to also look at the performance measures section. So each of these different sections has information that are specific to each purpose area. So in looking here at Purpose Area 3, would strongly recommend pulling together the information that relates to Purpose Area 3 from each of these 3 different places. And then step 4 and 5 are where you would need to go online to the CTAS site and download information, because there can be specific purpose area narrative question section, and there are specific templates that are required for the Purpose Area 3 that need to be that you need to review and you need to be familiar with. Then there's also purpose area specific frequently asked questions, and sometimes those are increased over time as different questions come up. But I don't know if there's as much this year, but in some of the earlier years there had been more of that. So it's really important to look at all these different things and be familiar with them for each specific purpose area. Next slide is, while planning before submitting, you want to make sure to have a single, if you put together and put a single file, you don't want to submit it that way. You need separate attachments, and you need to clearly label each attachment. And I would also recommend combining related sections like resumes. So, you know, you have to kind of view how the peer reviewer is going to be looking at it. And if you have too many attachments, then it's hard to find your narrative section, for instance, or your community profile. So one of the things that we've seen before that I wouldn't recommend doing is you don't want a separate attachment for each resume. You want to combine all the resumes, for instance, if you're submitting resumes, into one attachment. Clearly label it and PDF it. It's very important, I think, to PDF every attachment that you do and to clearly label it, because if you haven't clearly labeled it, then it's hard for the peer reviewer to find. And you have to keep in mind, you know, that it ultimately is you want to make life easier for the peer reviewer so they give you a higher score. And so it's really important to clearly label and to PDF. The purpose of PDFing is that you run the risk, if you don't PDF, that the formatting, you could have detailed formatting on, say, your 15-page purpose area narrative. You could have, you know, incredibly nice graphics and good formatting, but if you don't PDF it and someone who's opening up has a different program than you've used to put it together, then all that could be lost, and it could be a mess. It could appear to be more pages. It can be all sorts of different problems. So I think I can't stress enough the importance of PDFing it so that the formatting you've put together stays intact. Next slide. So here is just, this is by going to justice.gov/tribal and through the, you can see on the left, this is just a screenshot from it. You can see that on the left, it'll have the grants, CTAS, and open solicitations and like. It also has prior awards. But this is showing you the page when you hit for open solicitations. And then it goes through, and you can connect to get the RFP, and then it goes through each of the different programs and the different ones here. So it has a basic fact sheet and like here. Then if we go to the next slide, so here is these are the actual templates, and we can't stress enough, you really need to go and get the templates. These templates are not in the RFP. They're referenced in the RFP, but they're not in the RFP. So one of the first things I would recommend doing with the RFP is to go and download all of the relevant templates that you're going to need to use for whichever purpose areas you're looking at here. So we've highlighted with an arrow the ones that we're going to cover today, but you of course would want to look at some other ones. So the frequently asked questions section, which we'll briefly cover, is highlighted with an arrow. If we go back for just a second, okay. Then the sample executive summary template and tribal narrative template. Those are two different templates that are important to look at and be familiar with. And then you can see that there's separate templates for each purpose area. So we're going to focus on purpose area 3 and go through things on the template there. There's also sample timeline, which gives you an idea of what's expected in the timeline, and the sample demographics form and budget worksheet. Those are very important ones that you need to be familiar with and to use. And so now if we go to the next one, next slide. So here we start we're not going to focus in great detail here on the community and justice profile, but keep in mind that it's really, really crucial that your tribal narrative, that the tribal community and justice profile needs to be connected with your purpose area 3. So if you're in purpose area 3, you're submitting for a wellness court, you don't, often people may delegate, and you may have somebody that's in charge of putting the narrative together, but it can't be developed in isolation. You need to make sure from the purpose of for a wellness court, you need to make sure that the problems identified and the strategy proposed in the tribal community and justice profile connects to the alcohol and substance abuse issues and the need for the wellness court. Because you could have, in the tribal community and justice profile, you can have any number of different issues and problems that may happen, that the tribe may be facing. But you need to be identifying problems and solutions that relate to the purpose areas you're submitting for and to the specific projects that you're identifying. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time on something in the 15 pages here that isn't related to something you're proposing a solution to. So you really need to make sure they're connected. I can't stress enough, I think it's important once each purpose area narrative is put together that you need to go back and connect and make sure it's connected to the tribal community and justice profile. That this section cannot be developed in isolation, and it needs to be modified. Even if someone's put, is delegated the responsibility to put something together, you need to go back once the purpose areas are developed, the purpose area narratives, and go back and ensure that this profile works with those purpose areas. So with the profile, there's first is this executive summary, and you see a chart on this page. It's 1 to 2 pages. It gives you the basic description. It's a quick overview, so you're identifying problems and strategy and the purpose area being requested. The primary part is on the next slide here, which is basically sets out to describe that this is the tribal narrative. There are 5 questions in it in which you're basically setting out the general form of your tribal government. Then you're looking at, describing tribal justice system, describing significant issues, current and future plans, and additional information. So those are all, you need to respond to each of these questions in the template. And then it's really important, I think we really need to highlight at the bottom here, there's a couple lines at the very bottom that says the tribal community and justice profile will be rated based on the following criteria. So it's the extent to which the application fully responds to the requested information and the need for funding as described in the tribal community and justice profile. So that's actually what the peer reviewers are going to be judging on is, did you do both of those things? Did you fully respond? And how is the need described there? And did you go through, in looking at that, you're asking for each of those 5 questions. I would also back up for a minute to the executive summary. It's important to keep in mind, if we go back one slide for a minute, the executive summary, sometimes, I would encourage putting a little bit more information here. Keep in mind that this is 5% of your score here, and so you do want to put more detail here. And the reviewers generally are required to score this separately. So it's not just checking the boxes. This is something that's 5% of your score. So you do want to make sure that you completely fill this in. So you list each problem, you list the strategy to address the problem, and the purpose area addressing the problem. So make sure that you do complete this because it is 5% of your score, and then 25% of your score is the remainder of the profile, which is the next slide. And then we'll focus again on purpose area 3 on the narrative, and I'll turn it back over to Lauren.
Thank you, Jerry, and apologies for the delay in the slides. My computer does not appear to like webinars so much, but we'll persevere. So to focus our attention on purpose area 3, which is where most of the Healing to Wellness Court funding comes out of, purpose area 3 encompasses 2 separate programs, the Tribal Courts Assistance Program, or TCAS, and the Indian Alcohol and Substance Abuse Prevention Program. This year, these numbers are estimations that the BJA has provided. They guesstimate that there is going to be $16.8 million awarded, that this will be distributed between 20 and 30 awards, ranging from $250,000 to $750,000. And each award will be 3 years. Last year, just as a point of reference, Purpose Area 3 received 124 different applications and 30 awards were made. Last year, they also distributed about $16.8 million. So we've received about the same level of funding, which is nice. Trish Thaxton is the point of contact for this award. If you have any questions as you're preparing your application, you can send emails to her. And so to focus our attention even further, this is the text that's provided on what's guiding Purpose Area 3. It's all things ranging in the tribal justice system, including what we've put in bold, Healing to Wellness Courts. They have specifically cited Healing to Wellness Courts, which they hadn't done in the past, but now that they're highlighted, it's making it an even more attractive purpose area for Healing to Wellness Courts. And just as a side note, they don't differentiate between adult, juvenile, family, or DUI courts. All of those different types of Healing to Wellness Courts are encompassed under this purpose area. In addition, the purpose area is designed to respond to general alcohol and substance abuse related crimes. It's intended, this is also where tribes are going to be applying for funding to enact the Tribal Law and Order Act provisions and the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act provisions, to develop, implement, and enhance substance abuse prevention and treatment programs generally, including Healing to Wellness Courts, and to engage in comprehensive strategic planning. So as Jerry mentioned earlier, this is also the purpose area under which strategic planning has been enhanced, and so applicants can apply to funding for a strategic plan and then apply to receive further funding to enact their strategic plan that they developed. As another side note, unlike other purpose areas, specifically purpose areas 8 and 9, tribes that are current grantees under Purpose Area 3, such as fiscal year 2013, are still eligible to apply this year. So to go to the specific narrative, like the community justice profile, the purpose area narrative have specific questions. And these questions do not appear in the RFP. They only appear in the template. But they definitely expect tribes to address each of these questions when submitting an application. While you don't need to format your application by these questions, you could attempt to address each one on an individual basis in an overall paragraph narrative. It's probably ideal to address them question by question because that's how peer reviewers are going to be looking for them. And if they're going to be able to easily spot, oh, they answered question 2 here, that will be all the better. We specifically identify number 5 and 6. This is where the meat of your descriptions are going. Describe how your program will address the identified problems. And for each identified problem, identify the specific goals and objectives of how you're going to address those problems. So 5 and 6 should contain a lot of detail about what specifically you're gearing to do for your Healing to Wellness course. There are 12 questions overall, so this is a 2-page template. It's important to note that some of these questions are rather specific. Each question does not deserve the equal amount of space. You only have 15 pages to address all 12 of these questions for the purpose area narrative. So maybe one question gets a line, maybe questions like 5 and 6 get several pages. Applicants must submit a separate narrative for each purpose area that the tribe is applying for. This is true even if you're applying for several different projects within the same purpose area. If, say, you are applying for Healing to Wellness Court as well as another tribal court enhancement program generally, even though both of those are in Purpose Area 3 and they're separate projects, you'll still only submit one purpose area narrative. However, if you're also applying for a grant to remodel your jail under Purpose Area 4, that's going to be a separate purpose area narrative, so you'll have 2 separate narratives. The template questions cover a whole range of issues, including problem identification, program design, your capabilities and competencies, how exactly are you qualified to pull off this great plan that you've just suggested, as well as your impact, outcomes, and evaluation plan for collecting data. And we'll go over that in these next few slides. Also, just to note, 15-page max, but we've seen that tribes that have submitted applications with fewer than 15 pages tend to be marked down. So even if there is a 15-page max, it's also sort of an implicit minimum. You should try and fill in every single corner of the application that you can. Oh, and as also it said on the previous slide, each purpose area narrative template is unique. And so if you're applying to multiple purpose areas, it's important to pull up the different templates for each purpose area because all the different sets of questions are different for each purpose area. So as I mentioned, CTAS does not include a definition of what a Healing to Wellness court or what a drug court is, even though they do identify it as a possible area that you could apply for. So we found it really helpful to pull from the BJA drug court RFP for the definition, because even though it's not in CTAS, the Bureau of Justice Assistance has bothered to identify and define what Healing to Wellness court is. So you don't need to pull up this RFP, although it is freely available at bja.gov, but here are just some definitions that they include. Drug courts are part of the larger universe of problem-solving courts that have been demonstrated by evidence-based practices to reduce recidivism and substance abuse among substance-abusing offenders and increase their likelihood of rehabilitation through these separate definitive markers for a drug court: early, continuous, and intense treatment, close judicial supervision, mandatory and random drug testing, community supervision, appropriate incentives and sanctions, and recovery support aftercare services. So even though this isn't included in CTAS, it might be nice to include this in your own application of, we know what a drug court is, and this is how we are fulfilling that definition through our programming. BJA has also identified specifically tribal healing to wellness courts. They refer to the Tribal Law and Policy Institute's publication on tribal healing to wellness courts, the key components, and that publication is available at this web address that BJA provides. It's also available on our own website at wellnesscourts.org, as well as on our Tribal Court Clearinghouse, www.tlpi.org. They also recommend, and this is again on the BJA RFP, to review the Adult Drug Court Program Evaluation Logic Model and Performance Measures. They provide a lot of different materials all around the evidence-based practices supporting drug courts, and those are available at this URL. And this can provide really good resources for how to do your performance measures, which we'll cover now. Oh, sorry, we're going to do the 10 key components first. So these are the tribal 10 key components. These are your standard key components that are found in our publication. We will also, we are currently in the approval process for an update to the key component publication. The key components are the same. We're just providing more resources for how exactly to go about addressing the key components. But these you can find on the BJA website, you can find on our own website, and you can find these in the BJA Drug Court Request for Proposals. So I believe most of the attendees here are familiar with the key components. I'm going to go through them really quickly. But if you're not familiar with them, last month or 2 months ago in December, we did a webinar on orientation to tribal healing to wellness courts, and we went into the key components very much in depth. And I highly recommend checking out that webinar if you're not familiar with these. So the first key component, bringing together our community healing resources with the tribal justice process, using a team approach to achieve the physical and spiritual healing of the participant and the well-being of the community. That's one of the big differences you'll see between the tribal and the state key components is the inclusion of the well-being of the community. Key component 2 concerns various referral points and prompt entrance. Key component 3 concerns legal and clinical screening for eligibility and as well as prompt placement. Key component 4 is providing access to holistic, structured, and phased substance abuse treatment and rehabilitation services. You will definitely want to highlight this in your application for how exactly you want a participant to go through the program and ensure accountability. Key component 5, participants are monitored through intensive supervision that includes frequent and random testing for alcohol and other substance abuse. Key component 6 is our progressive consequences and rewards or sanctions and incentives. Key component 7 is ongoing judicial interaction with each participant, and judicial involvement in team staffing is essential. We actually have a webinar devoted solely to this key component about the unique role of judges in healing to wellness court. This would be a good webinar both for new judges that are not exposed to the healing to wellness court model, as well as for your team as a whole, because this judicial perspective is so unique compared to other adversarial systems. Key component 8 concerns the monitoring and evaluation. This is something that your RFP, or rather your application, should definitely address. The RFP specifically identifies that they want to see performance measures. How exactly are you going to be able to prove that your healing to wellness court is making a difference? I see we have a question. I will get to that in just a minute when we get to our frequently asked questions from Ruth. Just to finish up the 10 key components, key component 9 is continuing interdisciplinary education, promotes effective wellness court planning, implementation, and operation. We, as a tribal technical assistance provider, couldn't agree more. We have lots of trainings, and we highly encourage you to attend those. Most of them are free of charge, including webinars like this. Key component 10, at the very end, the development of ongoing communication, coordination, and cooperation among team members, the community, and relevant organizations are critical for program success. So this was all a really quick overview of the 10 key components, which I'm sure you're all plenty familiar with. But just to bring home, it's really important to highlight these in your application just to ensure to the reader that you are familiar with these, you know how they work, and how your program is going to interrelate with these. Additionally, especially for the CTAS application, your peer reviewer may not be familiar with drug courts. They're reading applications for the tribal court programming generally, as well as treatment programs generally. So Healing to Wellness Court might be a niche that they're not familiar with. So highlighting these key components can provide dual services by also allowing you to showcase to the reader what exactly it is you're planning to do.
Lauren, if I can add this, a couple things. One is that this is, in looking at things like the key components, is one of the big differences between applying for CTAS and applying for a grant that is drug court specific. Because with CTAS, you've only got the 15 pages for Purpose Area 3, and I can go ahead and answer the question that was asked about Purpose Area 3. If you're applying, if Wellness Court is one of the projects you're applying for, and you're applying for, say, a peacemaking court or something like that, in addition to that, under Purpose Area 3, you're limited to one application for Purpose Area 3, one 15-page application to address all of the issues on the Purpose Area 3 template with regard to each project that you're covering in Purpose Area 3. So it's very different than a drug court-specific RFP, like the BJA Adult Drug Court RFP that we'll be doing a webinar on tomorrow, that in that RFP you're going to be expected to provide much more detail, not just in terms of that you're familiar with the 10 key components, but how you plan to implement them, specific information on it there. In this, for CTAS, you're not going to be able to have that much detail. I mean, you would probably want to lay out that you're familiar with the 10 key components and that you're going to be following those 10 key components. But on that 15-page purpose area narrative, you're not going to have the space to answer all those questions and to be able to go in great detail about how you're actually going to implement each of those 10 key components. So it's a very different kind of proposal. And as Lauren was indicating too, that with CTAS, the advantage is you're going to have reviewers who are familiar with tribal proposals, with tribal programs, but you're not necessarily, you might have reviewers that aren't familiar with wellness courts and certainly aren't familiar with the specifics of the different 10 key components. Whereas the reverse would be true for the drug court specific ones, where you would have reviewers that would be familiar with very detailed familiarity with drug court concepts, but not necessarily with tribal programs. So you'd have to keep in mind the nature of the reviewers. And to follow up a little bit more also on the question that was asked about Purpose Area 3, I think you need to be careful in terms of being overly ambitious in terms of how many different things you're going to try to do under Purpose Area 3. That one of the things that's in the nature of the page limitation and the scoring is that if you're trying to do too much, you're going to run into the risk of not being able to adequately answer all the required Purpose Area 3 questions for each different thing that you're proposing. So the nature of the peer review process discourages overly ambitious ones. So keep in mind that however many things you're proposing to do under Purpose Area 3, that those are going to be, you're still limited to that 15-page limit, and you're still expected for each component of what you're proposing to be able to adequately answer all of those all of the questions in the Purpose Area 3 template. So there's just a word of caution to do what's feasible, but be aware that you don't want to be overly ambitious, because you are limited. No matter how many different things you're proposing to do under Purpose Area 3, you've still got that 15-page limitation.
Thank you, Jerry. This slide, these are potential nice footnotes just to support the fact that healing to wellness courts have been around a long time, and there's a lot of data supporting their existence. These are all state drug court specific, but certainly applicable to tribes. This I'm putting up just for reference. If you do look at the BJA drug court RFP, along with the tribal 10 key components, you'll see reference to the 7 BJA design principles. They are sort of supplemental key components that once you look at them, you'll see they tie into particular key components, sometimes duplicative. I just put it up just so you know what they are. Applying under CTAS, I wouldn't worry about these design features. They're not any sort of requirement in applying for them. You will need to reference them if you're applying under the BJA drug court RFP. And in our new 10 key components publication, we attempt to try and explain and link and describe how these interact with the 10 key components. But for the purposes of CTAS, I wouldn't worry about it, just so you know what they are. Performance measures. So in the RFP, it will note that if you are awarded a grant under Purpose Area 3, you will be asked to provide data that measures the results of your work. They provide some sample performance measures, but it's up to you to dictate and define what does success mean. So it can be a little tricky designing your own performance measures, and they do provide a lot of different guides for this, and so we're going to go through just some of them, but just so you know what they are. Again, submission of performance measures data is not required for the application. They just want you to be on alert that if you do receive an award, reporting your data is going to be a requirement of your grant management. So after awards are made, DOJ staff will provide additional information about how data should be collected and reported. So these are some sample performance measures. In the templates that they provide on justice.gov/tribal, they have different performance measures for each purpose area. So these are just sample performance measures they've provided for Purpose Area 3. But again, keep in mind that healing to wellness courts is just one possibility among lots of different projects that can be applied for under Purpose Area 3. So these may or may not be applicable to your healing to wellness court. But some sample performance measures are our program. We hope to achieve a % increase in the number of cases handled by our court, the number of full-time employees in the court, a % reduction in the number of arrests for crimes where alcohol or substance abuse was a factor, a % increase in the number of individuals receiving treatment services. And then how exactly are we going to approve that we reach that goal? By measuring the number of cases filed, the number of cases filed specifically for substance abuse and alcohol cases, the number of judicial or other court positions created, and the number of arrests. We'll look at the arrest records. Similarly, we want to achieve a % increase in the number of participants that are in their trainings, and so we'll measure these by the number of individuals receiving treatment, the number of participants that attend trainings, the number of participants that attend trainings during our current reporting period. So again, these are just some examples that you are free to pull word for word or design on your own. Because healing to wellness courts are such a specific project, and because there's this BJA drug court RFP, they have performance measures just for drug courts. So these might be nice to pull if you're doing a healing to wellness court application, including, we have a performance measure for the percentage of participants admitted to our healing to wellness court, the percentage of participants who successfully complete healing to wellness court, the percentage of participants who tested positive for an illegal substance either during healing to wellness court or after, the percentage of arrests increased before and after Healing to Wellness Cohort participation, the number of participants who recidivate or are arrested subsequent to a successful graduation. So these might be a little bit more helpful when you're designing your performance measures of how you're going to report your data. So moving right along, so we've covered the community profile, which is your overall narrative describing all the purpose areas. Your purpose area narrative, which is just for purpose area 3. And now we're at the project or program timeline. This is only going to be 5% of your application score, so it's important to keep that in mind. However, the timeline can also be a really useful tool to capture some of the details of your programming that you can't squeeze into the 15 pages of your purpose area narrative. There is no page limit to your timeline, so this can be as extensive or minimal as you want it to be. But here's the sample that they give on the website. So it's really basic, and some tribes submit this exact table, one page of just, here's what we plan. In month 1, we want to implement our program. In month 6, we'll evaluate. In month 12, we'll implement the recommendations from our evaluation. But this can get really detailed if you want to. What they want to see is that you have the objectives identified in your program and when you are planning to address those objectives and how are you going to do that. So this timeline can be exactly how you want to do that. Other things worth putting in your timeline might be trainings that you plan on attending. There's the NADCP drug court training in May. There's the Tribal Law and Policy Institute has the Healing to Wellness Court Enhancement training in September. Maybe you stick those in that we're planning to send our team to these trainings to capture, key component number 9. We're planning to hire a new position, a Healing to Wellness Court coordinator. So we're going to, list the position as open, and in 2 months we hope to have the position filled. We plan on conducting an evaluation at month 12. These are just ideas of things that you can throw into your timeline to really add to your application without taking away your 15 pages of your purpose area narrative. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry just to quickly address some other possibilities of how you can add to your application.
Thank you, Lauren. And I wanted to first go back to the timeline that Lauren was talking about, and this fits in with also the attachments. Is that in these kinds of things? I mean, the timeline is 5% of your score, but the timeline, and so what you've got here in the chart that's provided as the illustration is the bare minimum that you would do, and I would think of that as the bare minimum. But there's no page limit on timeline. You could submit a 20-page timeline. That, I mean, you don't have to do something like that. But I always look as a grant reviewer or grant writer as where are the places where there aren't page limits. And so both in the timeline and in the attachments on the next slide, these are things that you can. You don't want to just limit to the minimum that you're required to do, but especially where there aren't page limits, you can really add much more rich detail that is going to help your overall score. So with the timeline, if you have a really detailed timeline, that may boost your score not only for the timeline, but for other sections. That in looking at the purpose area, like the reviewer might take that into consideration of looking at a very detailed and well thought out timeline. And here with the attachments, most of these are not required attachments, but my recommendation as a grant writer and grant reviewer is that you should do as much of this as you possibly can, because it can add to it. And most of these things, the letters of support, the resumes, the job descriptions for unfilled positions, the memorandum of understanding, if you have any of those, or memorandum of agreement or understanding, that those kind of things provide much more detail in terms of what you're setting out to do. And let me just provide a couple illustrations. First, letters of support. That letters of support, again, no page limits. Someone could submit a 15-page, single-spaced great detail as to how you're planning to actually, implement your wellness court. I'm not saying you should necessarily do that, but it has been done. That letters of support can have, they're not limited to the 15 pages, for instance. That you can put just a lot more information, both about the tribe and about how you're planning to implement your different programs through letters of support. Resumes are certainly very helpful, and it's important to also have job descriptions for unfilled positions. In both of those instances, you may have people who are questioning as reviewers and saying, well, how does this job, say you've got a clerk position, and someone just thinks in general about a clerk or probation or someone, and you can use the resumes and the job descriptions to better connect it to the wellness court and to the different objectives that you're setting out to do, especially if you're funding any position that might not naturally flow from it. That can be very important, because one of the things you want to make sure is that the budget's connected to what you're proposing to do. And again, memorandums of understanding can lay out a lot of information. You could lay out in the MOU how you're going, that you're going to follow all of the different, the 10 key components, and some detail on how you're going to do that. So again, so these are optional, and even with the timeline that it's, you've got a minimum of what's required there, but these are places where you can add much more rich detail that can really boost your score across it. And this is particularly important for the purpose area narrative, which is now 50% of your score. So though these are optional, I would strongly recommend, if at all possible, doing as many of these things as you can.
Thanks, Jerry. Moving right along, we're making decent time. I wanted to just draw your attention to their frequently asked questions that CTAS provides. Like the templates, they have general FAQs, and then they have FAQs for each purpose area specific. So the first FAQ discusses the different possible projects that you could apply for under Purpose Area 3. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different ones. I have 2 preventions. I don't know why I did that. So not only can you do healing to wellness courts, but they also wanted to highlight that when you receive a CTAS award, you're going to be expected to attend certain trainings, including trainings that BJA offers, and that you'll be paying for your travel with your grant funding. So that's something that you need to take into consideration when you're developing your budget, that, like, for instance, you will need to travel to go to the CTAS orientation that is actually occurring next week for the 2013 grantees. So that's something you'll need to put into your budget. A question that we've already addressed, whether if you're applying for 2 separate projects under the same purpose area, you use just one narrative to do that, but you want to make sure that everything is still linked and lines up specifically with your identified problems. A lot of these questions, they provide a lot more detail than I'm putting here, so I do recommend that you look at these frequently asked questions on your own time. But just some more examples. Are grant deliverables subject to approval? Yes, they are. Is a match required? No, it is not. This is really important because, as we'll discuss tomorrow, the BJA drug court RFP does have a match requirement, only for 10%. No, that's for OJJDP. Purpose areas 8 and 9 have a match requirement. Forget what it is for BJA, but anyways. You are eligible to apply for fiscal year 2014, even if you were a grantee in 2013 or 2012, and you will receive technical assistance if you're a grantee. An advisory board is not required to apply under this purpose area, but it is highly recommended, and here are some strategies for what they recommend an advisory board should look like and who should be on it. Small tribes can apply, big tribes can apply. You do, as I mentioned, you do need to set aside money to attend training. And again, if you're applying for multiple purpose areas or multiple projects under Purpose Area 3, you're still bound by the award cap of $350,000, unfortunately, even if you have multiple projects. So to briefly go over OJJDP's purpose areas, which are 8 and 9, because they do offer potential healing to wellness court funding. The juvenile justice is purpose area 8. CARA is the main contact. There's her information. Unfortunately, unlike purpose area 3, which had an estimated funding amount of about $16.8 million, purpose area 8 only has about $1 million. They give away only 2 to 3 awards under this purpose area. You know, it's not worth totally throwing away. There's still money to be had, but just so you know, it's a little bit more competitive in this purpose area. Additionally, this purpose area has a 10% match requirement, and if you were a grantee last year or the year before, you are not eligible to apply for this grant. Similarly, purpose area 9, the Tribal Youth Program. This is also a potential Healing to Wellness Court funding option. This year, there's about $5 million to be had, which unfortunately is down from last year. There was $8 million. 10 to 12 awards here, a little bit more options. CARA is also the main contact for this purpose area. There's no match for purpose area 9, but similar to 8, if you're a current grantee, you're not eligible. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry now to go over some of the pros and cons with this overall CTAS RFP.
Well, and thank you, Lauren. I think I just wanted to also add on the Tribal Youth Program, it's important to keep in mind that though juvenile wellness courts are specifically mentioned as possible things to fund under that, that there's a wide range of different things that can be funded under the Tribal Youth Program, from cultural activities and other things, and only, I think, you know, one of the 5 general areas within Tribal Youth Program is even court-related. So keep in mind that it is, that though it's certainly identified as one of the things that can be funded under it, you've got court-related activities are only one of 5 different areas or approximately that can be funded under it, and there's only 10 to 12 awards. And so that's important to keep in mind. And a lot of the, you know, our focus on Purpose Area 3 is both because there is more funding available, and Purpose Area 3 is where more tribes have been funding wellness courts than other parts of CTAS and other funding sources. And it also is, the Purpose Area 3 is probably the most open-ended purpose area because it is a wide range of different tribal court assistance and alcohol and substance abuse programs. So it is in many ways one of the broadest categories for funding a number of things. But in looking next at the pros and cons, so this is looking at applying for under CTAS, for instance, rather than applying for a drug court-specific RFP. So here, there's more time to apply. It's tribal-specific funding source. That wellness courts are included as some of the things that can be funded, that you would assume that the peer reviewers, will have tribal court-specific knowledge, that they will be, when looking at tribes and tribal courts, that they will be burdened by knowledge of that, that there is a significant amount of money, as I mentioned, that it's almost $17 million annually and 20 to 30 awards. It's over a 3-year period, and that there's potentially more flexibility, that things like the violent offender provision don't apply through CTAS, and there is not as much specific requirement as there is in some of the different drug court RFPs, no match requirement, and you can also look at the way the CTAS is designed. In theory, you can work the Healing to Wellness Court objectives incorporated into an overall tribal plan or an overall tribal strategic plan. And also that many, in most cases, most tribes are already planning to submit a CTAS proposal. They might not be planning to submit a drug court-specific proposal, but would be planning to do a CTAS proposal, so you simply be incorporated into a process that hopefully is already underway. Now, some of the different cons, some of the downside, though, is that this is not an RFP that's specific to wellness courts or to drug courts. And that peer reviewers may not have adequate drug court-specific knowledge. That here you have to keep in mind the nature of the peer reviewers. In for CTAS, the peer reviewers, you have to presume, are going to have tribal knowledge and tribal court knowledge, but they may be completely unburdened by knowledge about drug courts. They may know nothing about the key components. They may not know nothing about healing to wellness courts. So you do have to provide more background about it in the proposal, and you may have peer reviewers who don't really understand drug court concepts. Then this is the third bullet is one that we've talked about, where the tribe may be proposing a number of additional things under Purpose Area 3, with wellness court as just one of those, and so that there may be more competition for it, less funding, less space to be able to explain it, and the like. The CTAS application process has many moving parts, and you may not have as much control over it as doing a drug court specific one. And there may not be enough space to adequately explain what your program is. So those are just some of the downsides. Then the next slide is very, very important, which is well, let's go to this one first. Is just the CTAS by the numbers gives you an overall idea, excuse me, of where CTAS funding, that there has been some gradual decline in the total funding each year. Hopefully this next year will, after the end of sequestration or virtual end, that it'll start moving back up, and it'll be improving under this one. But it is important to keep in mind that overall there has been some reduction. That has affected some, like the OJJDP funding that we've talked about more. I think that the BJA Purpose Area 3 has been relatively stable through here, but different parts have been reduced. So the OJJDP, the odds of being funded under that have reduced a little. Also in BJA funding, that the correctional facilities funding is down. Next slide. This next slide is really very, very important. I mean, if you look at no other slide, I think this is a really important one, is to be aware of why, some of the different main reasons why CTAS applications weren't funded. So not responding to all the requested information, that's a classic. You have to make sure you respond to everything that's asked, everything, even if you're not quite sure what to put, you have to try to put something to explain it and respond to all the things identified in the RFP and in the templates. Then, and I mentioned this earlier, is failing to draw the connection between the pressing problems identified in the tribal community and justice profile and the programmatic activities proposed in the purpose area narrative. So far too often, someone will be in charge of the profile and other folks in charge of the purpose area narrative, and then they're not connected together. So identifying problems, the tribe may have a huge range of different problems, but if those, you don't want to identify, to focus on every conceivable problem in the purpose area narrative, you want to only focus on those for which you are proposing solutions through one or the other of the different purpose areas, and to make it very specific as to how what you're proposing under the purpose area directly connects to the problems that you've identified. It's really important to do that. I think one of the things that's also here that we don't have a bullet on, but I think is really, really important, is that we've seen sometimes over the years proposals that don't, where the tribal community and justice profile is done by someone, and you might have the perfect purpose area narrative, but if you don't, if the profile is only, say, 6 pages out of 15 that's available, and it only covers some of the different issues, then it's potentially, no matter how good the purpose area narrative is, that nothing the tribe submits is going to be funded. So the purpose area narrative, or excuse me, the profile is so important, and it's so important that it be, it can be developed initially, but you have to go back and ensure that it works with each of the purpose area narratives, and that it isn't a 6-page one. Make sure that it completely fills up the full 15 pages and adequately gives a profile, because a bad, or a short, inadequate community profile can sink, the best purpose area narrative. Not providing the requested information in relevant sections where peer reviewers can easily locate it. Keep in mind that peer reviewers are often, doing peer review on midnight the night before it's due, and they may not know to look in different places. So you want to make it easy for them to find it. Then there's often a real problem with the connection in the budget and the purpose area narrative. So if you've got a budget that provides for increased clerks, for instance, you need to make a connection as to why and how that's connected to a wellness court under Purpose Area 3. Now, you may have that the clerk you're proposing is going to be the wellness court coordinator or the case, in charge of the case manager or the like. And if so, you need to make that clear, because otherwise the reviewer could look at that and say, well, what's the connection between the clerks and here? Or I've seen proposals where the question was, that things hadn't happened before and there isn't any additional person hired to make sure it happens. And you really need to make that connection. There needs to be something in the budget that shows how it's going to happen. Inconsistencies within the proposal, so you have different people doing different sections, not adequately connected together, and not providing specific measurable targets for performance measures. So those are just all common problems. Then there's tips for doing a CTAS proposal, and I'd encourage you to read these in more detail later. I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'll just highlight a few. The reading the solicitation. Again, as we talked about, make sure you focus on the on-site CTAS website and especially the templates. Don't wait till the deadline to apply. Make sure, as we've talked about, go back and redo the community and justice profile after you've completed the purpose area narratives. And again, do the same with the budget to make sure that there's adequate connection between them. Next slide is contact the people at the agency if you have questions, and document it, in discussions you've had with them. You have to, of course, submit a single application, include all the required documents, label them clearly, make them a PDF, complete the budget, include additional documents, not just those required, but additional ones that are optional too. Follow all directions, formatting, file name, spacing, margins, and page length requirements. Last year, I think that there was the RFP didn't indicate that things had to be double-spaced, and which made it difficult for scoring. But this year, it's quite clear that it has to be double-spaced. All the different things need to be double-spaced. Doesn't necessarily mean that the template questions have to be double-spaced or that you have to list every part of them if you're having limitations on space. But it needs to be double-spaced, that there's a risk you don't follow that direction that only half your proposal, for instance, would be read. So you want to make real attention to that. I think in terms of time, I just want to highlight just a few more things then. The slide's general approach to grant writing. Keep in mind the general rhythm of when RFPs come out. It tends to be the same time every year, January through April generally, but you won't hear until September in almost all instances, and some often not till late September. That it helps to contact the grant managers, document it if they answer a question that you think peer reviewers might be confused about. Check with the TA providers, check with online resources and see if you can locate prior proposals. Serve as a peer reviewer. If you've never served as a peer reviewer, there's no better exercise, I think, than for writing a grant than serving as a peer reviewer. And if folks who are on the line don't, if you want to be one and you haven't been one, just send me an email and I can connect you with how to go about being included as a peer reviewer. But I really highly recommend that. If you've applied unsuccessfully in the past, the next slide, that I always ask for your comments. You may just be annoyed that you didn't get funded, but you want to make sure you know what was good and what were strengths and weaknesses of your last proposal. Keep those prior proposals in their comments. Keep in mind that you're not going to get the same review panel, but that the general issues are probably going to be the same. If you're not funded, ask the agency what TA you can get without grants, what TA you can get on capacity building to do a better grant next time, what scholarships you can get for conferences and trainings. And ask the agency who is funded and copies of, ask if they can provide successful applications. Sometimes that can be done. And ask for the TA provider. I think we've covered most of the other ones here. I think that on the next page, I think the one I would really highly recommend is look, the last arrow is ask about the odds of funding by program. So you really want to closely look at how many usually apply, how many are usually funded. The RFP here lists how many are funded, but it doesn't always list how many have applied, and you might, ask the agency for that information, and sometimes you can get that to get an idea. So you want to, if you're looking at CTAS, for instance, the OVW funding, because it's tied to a percentage, has the highest, the most funding, and so your odds are best with that. Your odds, as Lauren were talking about on the one OJJDP Purpose Area 8, where only 2 or 3 are funded, but that's much limited, much less likely. There's also some other tips, general tips for grant writing. I think we've covered most of those, but you might want to look at those. And then the next one is the questions. That it's always helpful to contact the folks at the different agencies and ask for questions. And if they respond to something that you think the peer reviewers could be confused on, you can always footnote that. And then for follow-up, there's information on Lauren's information that she's the easiest to reach. And then, Lauren, do you want to cover the website? And then I think we have at least one question.
Sure. This is just a snapshot of our website available at wellnesscourts.org. If you click on federal funding agencies or funding announcements, you'll find information on all of these RFPs, links to the government websites, as well as the specific solicitations. And then as soon as this webinar is recorded, I'll be posting a recording as well as a copy of the PowerPoint slides. So feel free to reference those at any point that you would like. And then, yeah, if we have any questions, please feel free. The floor is yours if you'd like to type them in.
Lauren, there was one question someone had asked about the dates for the NADCP conference.
Oh, sure. The NADCP conference is May 28th to 31st, 2014. It's taking place in Anaheim, California, right next door to Disneyland. It's a great conference if you've never been. It's about 4,000 attendees. There'll be a tribal track that the Tribal Law and Policy Institute is providing, but there's tracks on co-occurring disorders, treatment programs, different evidence-based practices, veterans courts, juvenile courts, DUI courts, cultural competency, everything under the sun. I highly recommend it.
And you're keep in mind with the budget that the RFP requires you just to provide funding for, I guess, 2 folks to go to 2 different trainings, basically an orientation and another training that are required. But you can and should include a lot more travel funds to attend different trainings. That there's a range of different trainings that are offered through the different agencies, through the Tribal Court Systems Program ones, through the Tribal Justice Institute, and through the National Judicial College. And Fox Valley provides funding specific to the Indian alcohol and substance abuse grantees. But there's a wide range of those. And if there are instances like the NADCP conference where you specifically know and you want to go to one, I would certainly encourage putting the specifics of that in your budget, because that's one that happens on an annual basis.
And if you've attended any trainings in the past, I would also highlight that in your application that you've received particular trainings and are incompetent in those fields. In addition to the NADCP conference, we're holding an enhancement training that I mentioned in September at the Agua Caliente Indian Reservation. It'll be 2.5 days, all tribal healing to wellness court focus. I see a question as to whether the April 2003 Healing to Wellness Court 10 Key Components publication is the most current one. Yes, it is. As I mentioned, we have submitted a publication for approval that's an update to the 10 key components, but it's not yet out of that approval process. It'll hopefully be available soon, but as far as right now goes in this application, the 2003 publication is the most current.
And that's the one that you would assume that the peer reviewer would refer to, because that's what's publicly available. Hopefully the updated one will be released soon, and so that can replace it. And there's been some modifications to the components themselves, and much more detail added to the publication that we hope to be able to post very soon. But the one that's available for, currently publicly available and for the peer reviewers is still the 2003 version. And
if you have any other questions, please feel free to type them in. If a question comes to you right after we end the webinar, please feel free to email me, Lauren, L-A-U-R-E-N, @tlpi.org. I can answer them at any time up to and after the application deadline. That's what we're here for.
And Trish was going to join us, but appeared to have difficulty. So, Trish,
Terry, I am on the line if you can hear me.
Hey, Trish. So
I've been here.
Can we open it up in case there's questions directly especially for Trish?
Yes, so
Absolutely.
Trish is the policy advisor and main contact for Purpose Area 3 CTAS. So this is a very good woman to ask your questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have specific to Purpose Area 3 or to the CTAS solicitation overall, if anyone has any.
And are we able to just open up so people can just directly ask questions, Maria?
I can try here. So everyone will be getting a PIN. So if you dialed in, just be sure to put in that PIN number. So I'll go ahead and open it up here.
We also had a question came in. It stated, and this refers to Purpose Area 8. It states you can't apply if you have a grant funded within the past how many years? And I think we just have to refer to I think that was Purpose Area 8 and 9. So usually those are 3-year grants. So you can check the CTAS awards online if you know that directly. You could just check through the justice.gov/tribal, and there are the prior CTAS awards. So you could check the last couple years and see if there is if your tribe has received one under from the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention. But Trish, with regard to Purpose Area 3, our tribe that currently has a Purpose Area 3 grant still apply this time with different grant objectives?
Yes. BJA does not have any restrictions on our purpose areas with regard to having existing grants with us. So the one place where having an existing grant with BJA would hurt you is if you have not been using those grant funds that you already have, or if you are delinquent in your reporting requirements and things like that. But there's no prohibition on having an existing award, and if you do have an existing award and the current application is intended to enhance the activities that you're undertaking, or to, in some way expand the work that you're doing through BJA funding, this is a good opportunity to explain that in your application.
I have a question just to clarify. The application should be double-spaced, Times New Roman, 1-inch margins. Is that all correct?
That is correct. There's not a penalty for not following that specifically. You just want to be certain that whatever you're submitting is very readable. And when you start getting into smaller fonts and not including the double spacing, it can sometimes become very fatiguing for the peer reviewers. And even though they're not supposed to take points off specifically for the spacing, if it becomes difficult for them to be able to read and comprehend your application, obviously that could negatively impact your score.
And on the RFP, it's on page 9, about the middle of the page, under using templates and formatting your application. But it says applicants should be double-spaced and use a font size of 12. It doesn't specify that it needs to be Times New Roman, but just a font size of 12, regardless of whether they use the templates provided or work outside the template.
Yes, that's correct. You're right. The specific font is not required. Again, it's just really making sure that what you're submitting is easily readable by the peer reviewers and by the staff at DOJ.
Then I also saw there was a question about more detail on the, I wasn't sure whether it was about the conference on the Agua Caliente Reservation, whether that's a reference to the Office for Victims of Crime Conference that's held every other December, or whether that's a reference to the Wellness Court Enhancement Training that's been held there in September. And I think, Lauren, you'd addressed that we're planning again this September.
Yes, we are planning again for this September. You can currently see last year's agenda online. It's available at ENH, as an enhancement, enhtraining.tlpi.org, or you can go to wellnesscourts.org, and under our prior event resources, we have all of the PowerPoints there. And we're currently developing the agenda again for this year. But as Jerry mentioned, TLPI has multiple conferences at the Agua Caliente Indian Reservation, and so our Indian Nations Conference is planned for December 2014, also at the Agua Caliente Indian Reservation.
And that's very tentative. That has not yet, the conference approval form has not yet been submitted on that. But very tentatively, it could well be December 11th through 13th of this year on the Agua Caliente Reservation. And there were pre-conferences prior to that. And in prior years, we have also done a pre-conference on wellness courts. So there could well be wellness court presentations at the conference itself and or at pre-conferences.
Yes, but tentative.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, I don't see any other questions.
Trish, was there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to add?
No, actually, you guys did a wonderful job of covering everything thoroughly. I kept listening to see if there was a time when I would need to jump in, and you really did a great job of covering all of it. I guess, well, the only thing that I would mention is not something that you miss so much as just making sure it's in the front of people's minds, is in making that decision between if you're looking to apply under the OJJDP purpose areas versus Purpose Area 3 for a Healing to Wellness Court or any other activities that might fall under either of those, would be to look at your service population and keep in mind that OJJDP's funds can only be used for juveniles up to their the last day prior to their 18th birthday. Once they turn 18, the day they turn 18, they are no longer eligible for services through OJJDP funding, and that's by statute. So if you're looking at serving a population between the ages of 15 and 21, you would want to look at the BJA funding rather than the OJJDP, or look at doing something where you have a continuum of programming that might use a combination of the two.
And that's one of the reasons why I think that the BJA Purpose Area 3 is so much more flexible than a number of the different ones, because, Trish, you could certainly fund, if you wanted to fund a juvenile wellness court, you could do that under Purpose Area 3.
Yes. Generally, it will be more competitive under Purpose Area 3 if it is following that population, up until the ages, 19 or 20 or 22, depending on what, is most valuable for the tribe. Those projects that are exclusively juvenile, while they are technically fundable by BJA, they tend not to be as competitive as those that include a juvenile and adult component, just because BJA's mission is focused around the adult system to a large extent.
We have a question, maybe this is one, Trish, for you, is can we send in a rejected proposal from a previous year to technical assistance for critique?
It's not something that BJA would be able to do, but if you were working with one of our technical assistance providers, I think that they might be in a position to provide some feedback on that. They are not allowed to write anyone's proposals, so they have to be careful about walking that line of providing feedback versus providing direction writing a proposal, but they certainly should be able to help with some feedback.
Well, I think if people have additional questions, if you want to send them to us or directly to Trish, or if you want us to forward things to Trish, we can certainly do whatever on that. I think I just wanted to also just explain that tomorrow's webinar is going to be specific to the drug court RFPs, and we have found in prior years that because there is such a difference between a CTAS wellness court proposal and the focus of it and the detail you would go into for CTAS versus the drug court specific RFPs, that it helps to split this up and look at them separately. That it just was far too much to kind of combine them together because you can't do the same proposal for both. You really have to modify in a great extent that the CTAS proposal is going to have to address all the different CTAS requirements and won't have as much space for the drug court or wellness court specific components of it, whereas a wellness court or a drug court specific RFP is going to expect much more detail that's specific to drug courts. And so tomorrow's RFP will focus more on the drug court specific RFPs, and in particular the BJA adult drug court RFP.
And with that, and we are 6 minutes over, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to us. And take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.